Assalamu alaikum students. The next question is by this. This question is from June 2013, paper 2, variant 2, question 3. So the first part of the question, which is for 8 marks, it is define the components of aggregate demand and with the help of a diagram explain how an increase in spending in an economy might result in inflation. Okay, all right. So in this part of the question, the first thing they are asking is about the aggregate demand and what are the components of aggregate demand. So this is the first thing that we have to do. So what is aggregate demand? So aggregate demand is basically the total effective demand of the entire economy or of the economy as a whole. So that is the one-liner definition of aggregate demand. Now let's talk about the components of aggregate demand. So there are basically 5 components. The fourth and the fifth components are written combined. So there are basically 5 components of aggregate demand, which include C, I, G, X, and M. Now how do we explain each of them? That is very important. The first component, which is C, it is basically known as consumer expenditure, or the consumption by household, means the consumers on goods and services. So all the goods and services that we purchase in an economy comes under the category of C. Okay, the next component is I, which is basically investment by the firms in that specific economy. So these firms belongs to the private sector. Do remember this, that public sector firms are not included in this specific component. The next component is G, which is basically the expenditure by the government of a country, basically on public goods such as infrastructures, roads, parks, etc., and on merit goods such as education, health. So they'll make colleges, universities, they'll make schools, they'll make hospitals, they'll make research centers, etc., etc. So these are all the components, all the parts of the component of G. Then the next part is X minus M. Now what is the concept of X minus M? X is for exports, as you all know, and M is for imports. So by subtracting all the imports by all the exports, means whatever we sell to other countries, we subtract what we purchase from other countries, and that gives us the figure which is known as net exports. And net export also becomes a part of aggregate demand. So if you answer this part with all the components, you'll get 3 to 4 marks. Now let's talk about the rest of 4 to 5 marks. Since in the second part of the first part of the question, they are saying that explain with the help of a diagram. So of course we have to make a diagram. So I have made a diagram here. This diagram, as you can see on the board, initially there is the aggregate supply and an aggregate demand curve. And you can see that wherever they are interacting, that is the equilibrium price level in the entire economy, which is at P1, and the output, the economic output, is Y1 at the moment. What will happen that if the demand is going to increase, or the overall spending in an economy increases due to any factor? For example, government decides to spend a very hefty budget on public goods. They will make infrastructure, they will make highways, they will make motorways. So of course they will increase the demand. So overall aggregate demand of an economy will increase. Let's say the investment is coming in the firm due to the confidence in the recent government, or the confidence in the economic conditions of a country. So there will be huge investment coming in the country. Or maybe the consumer confidence, they will since they think that the situation will be stable in the near future, they'll start spending more money. So any component can actually be increased. They can be increased in any of the components. So as a result, what will happen that your aggregate demand curve will shift to right. So when your aggregate demand curve shifts to right and your aggregate supply curve remains constant, what will happen that after the shift, the price level is going to increase on the new equilibrium point, and at the same time your economic output will also increase. So this is what you can show on the graph, the price level on the y-axis, the GDP on the x-axis. We'll make the aggregate demand and aggregate short-run aggregate supply curve. I'll explain you later. So we can make this, and we can show the shift, and we can show the change in the price level, which is basically known as the change in the price level is known as inflation. So now let's talk about the diagram in words. So what we can write that whenever the aggregate demand increase, which in other words means the spending and economy increase, the curve, the demand curve, the aggregate demand curve shifts rightward. Now, if it is going to shift rightward, so in spending, you can also give a moderate detail about how the spending is going to increase, but it can be increased by the consumers, by the investment firms, by the government. You can just write a sentence or two about that as well. So when the curve is going to shift rightward on the same short-run aggregate supply curve. Since the short-run and long-run aggregate supply curves are different, we are not going to go into the detail right now. So it's better to write the short-run aggregate supply curve. That is a better way of writing it. So just write short-run aggregate supply curve. So when short-run aggregate supply curve is constant and your aggregate demand curve is shifting rightward, what is happening that the higher prices are prevailing in the market because of the increased demand. So if higher prices are prevailing in the market, it means there is inflation in the market. Now this specific type of inflation is known as demand pull inflation, because our aggregate demand curve is shifting rightward, and due to the shift in the demand curve, the inflation is taking place, or that is causing the inflation. So this kind of inflation is known as demand pull inflation. And of course, with the inflation, we can see that the real GDP is also increasing. So with the aggregate demand, the GDP is also increasing. If you're going to explain these points with the help of a diagram, it will help you in gaining 4 to 5 marks, which will be in total 8 out of 8 marks, inshallah.